Hi, I'm Kermit the Alien, and you're watching Resto Roomba. Welcome to my first robot restoration of 2022, featuring the heaviest paint job I ever did. In today's video, I'm going to restore a Scooba 385, the one that was seen in some of my earlier videos, known under the nickname Wide-Eyed Scooba. It's about time it gets an actual name. Its name is going to be Kosmos, which means space in Russian, as I've decided to theme it after Euro-Mir, a German roller coaster themed after the Russian space station Mir. It all started because the interior color of the Scooba reminded me of Euro-Mir's mirrors. Even though the space station is long gone by now, as it burned in the atmosphere in 2001, I'm still fascinated by it. I've created an Euro-Mir mood board, which you can see here, and using it I came up with a design. The biggest feature is, of course, the tank. It will feature the space station on a galaxy background, replicating the background where you wait for the lift. The handle will feature the Euro-Mir logo, and the bottom clip will be painted in a similar split black and white pattern with red accents. The bumper will be a bluish silver with metal-like patterns, just like in the last tunnel of the roller coaster. The zigzag pattern is also taken from Euro-Mir, this time from the queue line. I will also paint of the originally silver details bright blue to match the rest. And to spice things up, I will also be using blacklight reactive paint, as the inside of Euro-Mir is filled with blacklight bulbs. The robot is in pretty good shape, only the tank needed unclogging, but I did that a long time ago. It does have a lot of scratching and a lot of deep scratches on the tank, but overall it's pretty clean. Taking this robot apart was harder than usual as the build isn't modular. Almost everything is under one big cover. To get inside, I needed to remove the bumper first. It was held in by only 2 screws on the bottom. The cover was held on with multiple screws, some on the bottom, some under the bumper, and some on the top, and a few scattered here and there. This was almost like a game, something like find a screw. To move the top along with the panel, I had to unplug the ribbon cable. I got inside the UIP to make sure everything looks good inside and proceeded to take apart the robot completely. I vacuumed the dust off and removed every piece until I'm left with an empty chassis. It was nice to examine this robot completely and see every part that makes it work, especially as it is a robot that works with water, and as you might know, water and electronics don't usually mix well. The wheels were pretty hard to remove and required some force, but I did manage to take them out without causing any damage or scratching. This is about 10-year-old plastic after all. I unscrewed the black bits that hold the bumper in place and removed the fabric that the previous owner stuck on. I take every non-electronic piece for a good clean using soap and water. That is the bottom clip, top cover, bumper, chassis, and black rubber pieces. I also cleaned the inner tubbing and nozzles using a syringe, as it had the smell of an old uncleaned aquarium. Eventually I found out one of the nozzles actually leaked, and I'm so thankful for myself that I found it, because this could potentially leak inside and ruin the electronics. I moved on to cleaning and analyzing the electronic components. First the vacuum motor, the wheels, from which I needed to remove sand stuck in the grooves, the wheel motors, in which I regreased the gearboxes, the brush motor that I also regreased, the pump, and finally the bumper sensor arrangement. I took the plastic parts to my workshop and prepared my desk for repainting. Starting with the bumper and the IR sensor top, I sanded it down and then smoothed it out using a finer grit to prepare the surface and get rid of deeper scratches. Cleaned it off and used white primer. I used a paintbrush because I wanted the paint to lay completely flat, as I am going to use metallics. I painted the surface black and covered it with gloss varnish to get a completely smooth surface. Then I started adding thin layers of silver chrome paint. Once I was happy with the coverage, I started adding the pattern I designed and used clear tape to get straight thin lines. I repeated the process until the whole thing was completely covered. I've gone back with metallics and black to clean up the design and painted tiny black dots one by one, once again over the whole thing. To seal the paint job, I used metal color clean varnish but added some blacklight reactive paints to it, so when exposed to blacklight, the bumper will glow. This also makes the chrome paint a little blue, which makes the color colder. Here is a preview of how it will look under UV light. Moving on to the user interface panel, I used a paintbrush again, this time because masking of this whole thing for airbrushing would be really complicated and time consuming. First I prime it and then paint it blue. I once again covered it with blue UV reactive paint. The blacklight neon paints are really transparent, that's why I needed to paint the base color first. I sealed it all with gloss primer and moved on to the next parts, the tank handle and clip. For the handle, I needed to mask off every non-silver part and then primed it finally with an airbrush. I paint both of them white, and to create the split on the clip, I used tape and went over it with black paint, avoiding the logo. Whilst the paint was drying, I started sketching out the Euro-Mir logo on the handle and painted the exterior black. I hand-painted the logo and used pink paint where the UV red will be. Same thing follows for the second part. I smoothed the paint job out with gloss varnish, then seal it off with matte spray. I did that before adding UV paint, because the matte actually blocks off ultraviolet rays, so basically stops the paint from glowing. After it completely dried, I added the red and checked them out under blacklight for results. Now for the hardest and longest part, the tank, which was actually the most extreme paint job I did on a robot to this date, so prepare for a lot. I sanded it down and masked off everything except the middle, primed the surface and painted all of it black. I used dark blues and more black paint to paint the spacey background. I sealed it with 2 thin coats of Mr. Super Clear so I could easily sketch out the design with watercolor pencils. Once I've drawn the whole space station on the tank, it was time to start painting. Starting with the solar panels, I made them slightly metallic to add some dimension. I've mixed some lighter paints to add reflections on the panels. The main body of the space station required 2 shades of beige, and the smaller panels required 2 shades of cold gray. I filled the rest in with black and painted details over it. I painted the handle part blue and wiped off the sketch. Next step was to paint the stars, and I used white for it. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, this part also has some blacklight features. With the first section done, I sealed it with a coat of resin-based clear spray, then removed the tape. This time I completely masked off the top but left the sides. I primed it and started painting a subtle gradient with dark teal paints. To deepen the color, I used a mix of candy dark blue and UV blue paint. I broadened the chassis and color matched it to the tank. I removed the tape completely, leaving it only on the rubber tank caps. I sketched out the name as well as the little arrow and painted it in a way to resemble the neon writing on the entrance of Euro-Mir. I once again sealed it with resin-based clear spray. Gotta make sure it's waterproof. The last part on the tank that needed to be painted was the outer ring. I primed it and painted it by hand to match with the gradient. This is the part that features the zigzags, so I started to paint it with blue. Once I was happy with the placement, I went over it with more blue to make it thicker. When that was done, I went in with UV reactive paint and then went back to the blue and make one zigzag into two whilst also cleaning up the paint job. Finally, it was finished. I did another 3 coats of clear resin spray to seal it all in completely. And really make sure it's gonna be waterproof, because I spent so much time on this paint job, I don't want any paint bubbling up. To fix the leaky nozzle, I used UV resin and covered the top along with the hole. I also did the same thing to the second one, just to make sure nothing is going to leak. I want this robot to work for another 10 years at least. Once all the paint has dried and the resin cured, it was time to assemble the robot. It was a bit of a struggle to put it back together with so many parts that had to be aligned perfectly, so I kind of had to go back and forth. And with that, Cosmos is finished. Are you guys ready to see the final results? I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as I did restoring this robot. It might have been hard, but aren't the biggest projects the most fun to do? I also made the Euro-Mir remixes myself, and they are available to listen in the music playlist. If you liked what you saw, leave a like and consider subscribing, as more epic robo content is on the way. Kermit the Alien signing out, peace!